Millionaire paid a poor girl to pretend to be his daughter for a day. Hours later, he was horrified by what happened. The reflection in the penthouse mirror showed a different man. Alexander Montgomery adjusted his Italian silk tie while observing the first lights of dawn over New York City. His eyes, once bright and determined, now seemed like dark pools of bitterness. The divorce had changed everything, especially his way of seeing the world. "Are you sure about this, sir?" asked Michael, his personal assistant, who stood by the dressing room door with an expression of evident concern. Alexander turned slowly, his Italian shoes creaking on the marble floor. "Do I have any other choice? Rachel wants to take everything I've worked for over the years. It's all because she says I cheated on her with her best friend. Lies. Pure lies to justify her greed." The Manhattan penthouse, valued at several $1,000,000, was only a small part of what was at stake. Rachel, his ex-wife, had hired the best lawyer in the city and was willing to drag him through the courts until she got half of his business empire. "But, sir, using a child for this—" Michael left the sentence hanging, unable to complete his thought. "It's all arranged," Alexander cut him off, pulling a manila envelope from his desk. "The social worker confirmed that there's a perfect girl for this. Her mother is sick. They desperately need money for the treatment. It's a win-win situation." Michael reluctantly took the envelope and extracted the photograph it contained. In it, a small girl of about 8 smiled shyly at the camera. Her large, expressive eyes conveyed an innocence that contrasted dramatically with the plan they were about to execute. "Her name is Lily," Alexander explained as he poured himself a glass of mineral water. "She lives in a tenement in the Bronx with her mother. The social worker says she's intelligent and learns quickly. She'll only need to pretend for a day, appear at some social events, create doubts about my past. Enough for Rachel and her lawyer to reconsider their demands." The plan seemed simple in theory. Present a supposed lost daughter, generate speculation about a possible legitimate heir, and use that uncertainty to pressure Rachel. But there was something in the girl's gaze in the photograph that made Michael feel a knot in his stomach. What if something goes wrong? Michael dared to ask. Alexander approached the window, observing the morning traffic that was beginning to intensify on the city streets. Nothing can go wrong. The mother will sign a confidentiality agreement. The girl will receive enough money for her mother's treatment, and I will regain control of the situation. It's one day, Michael, just one day. The cell phone ring interrupted the conversation. It was a message from the social worker. "Everything ready for this afternoon. The girl is prepared." Alexander smiled for the first time in weeks. His reflection in the window showed a man who had found a purpose, albeit one born of revenge and resentment. "Prepare the car, Michael. We're going to meet my daughter." As Michael left the room, Alexander remained in front of the window, contemplating the city that stretched before him like a kingdom he was not willing to share. The morning sun bathed the buildings in a golden light, but inside him, a shadow of doubt began to grow. Was he really prepared for what he was about to unleash? In his mind, he went over every detail of the plan. The story they had fabricated was perfect. An old relationship before his marriage to Rachel, a mother who had never told him about the pregnancy, a daughter who had just discovered her true identity. It was the kind of scandal that New York high society would love, the kind of story that would generate enough doubts to shake Rachel's claims. "The car is ready, sir," Michael announced from the door. Alexander nodded, picked up his briefcase, and headed towards the elevator. In a few hours, he would meet the girl who, unknowingly, was about to change his life in ways he couldn't even imagine. The car glided through the narrow streets of the Bronx, a neighborhood that contrasted dramatically with the luxurious Manhattan that Alexander had left behind. Michael drove cautiously, avoiding street vendors and children playing on the sidewalk. The black Mercedes-Benz stood out completely from the surroundings, attracting curious glances from neighbors. "Fed's here, sir," announced Michael, stopping the car in front of a tenement with peeling but clean walls. Alexander observed the place through the tinted window. A concrete staircase led to several small apartments on the second floor. In the common courtyard, hanging laundry swayed in the morning breeze and some potted plants gave a touch of life to the space. "Apartment 2B, muttered Alexander, checking the address on his phone. As he climbed the stairs, the businessman felt a mix of emotions he hadn't expected. The sound of his Italian shoes against the worn concrete seemed to amplify each step. He stopped in front of a modest but well-kept door, where a small pot with red geraniums decorated the entrance. Before he could knock, the door opened. A thin woman with evident signs of illness, but with an unbreakable dignity in her posture, greeted them. "Mr. Montgomery, we were expecting you. I'm Sarah, Lily's mother." The interior of the apartment was small but impeccably clean. The walls, though faded, were decorated with children's drawings and some family photographs. An old fan spun slowly on the ceiling, moving the warm morning air. "Where's the girl?" asked Alexander, trying to maintain his professional tone. Sarah turned towards a small room. "Lily, sweetheart, come meet Mr. Montgomery." A small figure emerged timidly from the room. Lily wore a simple but clean dress, and her black hair was carefully combed into 2 braids. Her eyes, large and expressive as in the photograph, curiously studied the elegant man who had invaded her space. "Good morning, sir," she greeted with a soft but clear voice, demonstrating the manners her mother had instilled in her. Something in the girl's gaze left Alexander speechless for a moment. He had expected to find a frightened or perhaps greedy child, but what he saw was a dignity and intelligence that took him by surprise. "Lily," Sarah began, "Mr. Montgomery is the one who's going to help us with my treatment." The girl nodded, demonstrating an understanding beyond her years. "The social worker explained to us that I have to pretend to be your daughter for a day. Is it like acting in a play?" The innocence of the question hit Alexander like a slap. "Something like that," he responded, clearing his throat. "Would you like to sit down? We need to talk about some important things." Michael, who had remained silent by the door, observed the scene with a mixture of concern and fascination. The girl sat on the old sofa, her feet barely touching the floor while her mother took a seat beside her. "I need you to understand something very important, Lily," Alexander began, adopting a softer tone than he had used in months. "This isn't exactly like a play. It's a special secret that will help us all. Secret. You'll be able to help your mum and I'll be able to solve some important problems." The girl looked at him intently, absorbing every word. "And I only have to pretend for one day? Like Cinderella at the ball?" The unexpected analogy provoked a small smile from Alexander. "Yes, something like that. But I need you to be very careful with what you say and do. Do you think you can do that?" Lily looked at her mother, who gave her a gentle squeeze on the hand. "Yes, sir, I can do it. My teacher says I'm very good in school plays." "Good," replied Alexander, taking an envelope from his briefcase. "Here's the first part of the agreed payment, Mrs. Sarah. You'll receive the rest when the day is over." Sarah took the envelope with trembling hands. "Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. This means a lot to us." As he observed mother and daughter, Alexander felt a pang of guilt that he tried to ignore. He stood up abruptly. "I'll come for Lily early tomorrow. I need her to be ready at 8 o'clock sharp. Michael will bring a suitable dress and shoes later." Before leaving, Lily called out to him, "Mr. Montgomery, how should I call you tomorrow?" The question stopped him in his tracks. "Dad," he replied without turning around. "Tomorrow you'll call me Dad." The exclusive boutique on Fifth Avenue had not yet opened its doors to the public when Alexander arrived with Lily the next morning. The owner, an elegant French woman named Sophie, was waiting for them personally, having agreed to open early as a special favor for one of her best clients. "Mon Dieu, what an adorable child," Sophie exclaimed upon seeing Lily, who was nervously clutching the skirt of her simple dress. "But we'll need to work hard to turn her into a true society lady." Lily observed with huge eyes the designer dresses adorning the store, her small hands gently brushing the luxurious fabrics as if she feared breaking them. She had never seen so much elegance in one place, and the contrast with her daily life was overwhelming. "I need her to look like my daughter," Alexander explained quietly to Sophie. "She has to look as if she was born with a silver spoon in her mouth." Sophie nodded conspiratorially and began selecting garments. "We'll start with something classic for the morning, then a more formal ensemble for lunch, and finally, this dress will be perfect for tonight's gala." While Sophie and her assistants worked on Lily, Alexander sat in one of the boutique's elegant armchairs, responding to emails on his phone. From time to time, he looked up to observe the transformation taking place in front of him. Dad?" Lily's timid voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Is it okay if I sit down? These shoes are very pretty, but—" Alexander looked at her. Sophie had dressed her in an elegant cream-colored skirt and blazer ensemble, and her patent leather shoes shone like mirrors. Her hair, previously in simple braids, now fell in soft waves over her shoulders. She looked like a porcelain doll, beautiful but uncomfortable. "Sit down," he replied, pointing to the chair next to him. "We need to talk about today." Lily sat down carefully, as if she feared wrinkling her new clothes. Her feet, in designer shoes, barely touched the floor. "Today you'll meet a lot of important people," Alexander began. "They'll ask you questions about your life, about your mother, about me." "What should I say?" she asked, nervously playing with the edge of her skirt. "You'll say that your mother and I met a long time ago before I married Rachel, that she never told me about you, and that you only recently discovered who your real father was." Alexander paused, carefully observing the girl's reaction. "Can you remember that?" Lily nodded slowly. "And if they ask me about my mum, my real mum, you'll say she lives in Boston and that you prefer not to talk about her." Alexander leaned forward. "It's very important that you don't mention anything about the Bronx or about your mother's illness." The girl frowned. "Why do we have to lie?" The question, so direct and honest, made Alexander tense up. Sometimes adults need to do complicated things to protect what's important." "My mum says lying is wrong," Lily insisted. "And she's right," Alexander replied, feeling a pang of guilt. "But this is different. It's like a play, remember? And you're helping your mum." Sophie interrupted the moment, bringing more outfits for Lily to try on. The girl stood up obediently, but before following Sophie, she paused. "Mr. Montgomery, do you have real children?" The question caught him off guard. "No," he replied dryly. "And you never wanted to have them?" Alexander felt a lump in his throat. Images of past arguments with Rachel about the subject flooded his mind. "That doesn't matter now. Go try on the clothes." As he watched Lily walk away with Sophie, Alexander noticed that his hands were shaking slightly. He took out his phone and dialed Michael. "Is everything ready for lunch?" he asked abruptly. "Yes, sir. The reservation at the club is confirmed. Mrs. Rachel will be there with her friends as every Thursday." "Good," Alexander replied. "Make sure the press is aware. I want all the society papers to cover the news of my lost daughter." He hung up the phone and stared at his reflection in one of the boutique's mirrors. The man looking back at him seemed confident and determined, but in his eyes there was a flicker of doubt he couldn't ignore. What had he become to be using an innocent child in his game of revenge? The sound of Lily's laughter from the fitting room snapped him out of his thoughts. For a moment, she sounded exactly like the child he never had. The Metropolitan Club gleamed under the midday sun. The central fountain cast crystalline sparkles as Alexander's Mercedes pulled up to the main entrance. Michael opened the rear door, and Lily emerged with the grace Sophie had been teaching her all morning. "Remember to keep your back straight," Alexander murmured as they walked towards the entrance. "And don't forget to use the cutlery from the outside in." Lily nodded, concentrating on not tripping in her new shoes. Her sky-blue dress moved softly with each step, and the small pearl necklace Alexander had insisted on buying gleamed at her neck. The maitre d' greeted them with an exaggerated bow. "Mr. Montgomery, your table is ready. Although I must mention that Mrs. Rachel and her companions are in the main hall." "Perfect," interrupted Alexander, a calculating smile crossing his face. "We'll sit in the main hall too." As they crossed the elegant dining room, Lily absorbed every detail in amazement: the crystal chandeliers, the white linen tablecloths, the waiters in their impeccable uniforms. Everything seemed taken out of a movie. "Dad," she whispered, remembering to use the agreed word, "are all those ladies looking at us?" Indeed, conversations had noticeably diminished since their entrance, and dozens of eyes followed them with barely disguised curiosity. At a central table, Rachel, elegant as always in her Chanel dress, had stopped mid-sentence, her glass of white wine frozen halfway to her lips. "Ignore them," Alexander responded quietly, as he pulled out the chair for Lily to sit. "Remember what we practiced." A waiter appeared immediately to hand them the menus. Lily looked at the elaborate descriptions in French with confusion. "I recommend the lobster ravioli," Alexander suggested, noticing her bewilderment. "They're excellent here." "Alexander," an icy voice interrupted the moment. Rachel had appeared next to their table, her expensive perfume filling the air. "What a surprise to find you here, and with company." Lily looked up, meeting Rachel's scrutinizing eyes. Alexander's ex-wife studied her as one examines a jewel for flaws. "Rachel," Alexander responded with false cordiality, "allow me to introduce you to Lily, my daughter." The silence that followed was so dense it could be cut with a knife. Rachel visibly paled, her knuckles white around her wineglass. "Your daughter," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know you had a daughter." "Neither did I until recently," Alexander replied, placing a protective hand on Lily's shoulder. "It's a long story." "I see," said Rachel, regaining her composure. She leaned towards Lily with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And how old are you, dear?" "8," Lily replied with the clear voice they had practiced. "8," Rachel repeated, making mental calculations. "How interesting. That means you were born just before your father and I got married." Alexander maintained his neutral expression, though inside he felt a mixture of triumph and guilt. The plan was working perfectly. He could see the doubt and concern in Rachel's eyes. "And your mother?" Rachel continued, her tone sweet but venomous. "Where is she now?" Lily hesitated for a moment, her eyes seeking Alexander's. "In Boston?" she finally answered, just as they had rehearsed. "I prefer not to talk about her." Rachel arched a perfectly lined eyebrow. "Of course, dear, it must be complicated." At that moment, Rachel's phone vibrated. She checked it quickly, and a subtle smile appeared on her lips. "If you'll excuse me, I need to make a call." "It was a pleasure to meet you, Lily." As Rachel walked away, Alexander noticed that her hands were shaking slightly as she dialed a number on her phone. He knew exactly who she was calling. Her lawyer. "Did I do well?" Lily asked quietly, nervously playing with her napkin. Alexander looked at her, noticing for the first time how vulnerable she seemed under all the borrowed glamour. "You did perfect," he replied, feeling a pang of remorse. "Now how about we order those ravioli?" But as Lily studied the menu with concentration, Alexander couldn't stop thinking about Rachel's calculating look. He knew her well enough to know that she wouldn't give up so easily. The real battle was just beginning. After lunch, Alexander took Lily to his office on the top floor of a skyscraper on Wall Street. The space, dominated by floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city, was as imposing as it was cold. The girl walked cautiously, as if afraid of breaking something in this sanctuary of glass and steel. "Is this where you work every day?" Lily asked, pressing her nose against the glass to look at the tiny figures moving in the streets far below. "Yes," Alexander replied distractedly, checking the urgent messages that had arrived during lunch. As expected, the rumor of his lost daughter was already spreading through the city's social circles. "And don't you ever feel lonely up here?" The question took him by surprise. He looked up from his phone to find Lily looking at him with a mixture of curiosity and something that seemed to be pity. "I don't have time to feel lonely," he replied dryly. "There's a lot of work to do." Michael entered at that moment carrying a tablet. "Sir, the press is already speculating about the girl. And Mrs. Rachel's lawyer has been calling insistently." "Perfect," Alexander smiled, but his smile faded when he noticed that Lily had found something on his desk. "Who is she?" the girl asked, holding a picture frame that Alexander had forgotten to put away. In the photograph, a young woman smiled at the camera, her dark hair moved by the wind on some distant beach. "Nobody," he replied brusquely, snatching the photo away. "Don't touch things on my desk." Lily's eyes filled with tears at the sudden harshness of his voice. "I'm sorry," she whispered, stepping back. Alexander felt a pang of guilt. "No, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that." He looked at the photograph once more before putting it away in a drawer. "She was someone I knew a long time ago." "Did you love her?" Lily asked with that direct innocence that only children possess. Alexander remained silent for a moment, lost in memories he thought were buried. "Yes," he finally admitted. "I loved her very much." "What happened to her?" "She left," he answered simply. "Sometimes people leave, Lily. It's part of life." Michael, who had been silently observing the exchange, intervened. "Sir, we need to prepare for tonight's gala. The stylist will arrive in an hour to get the girl ready." Alexander nodded, grateful for the interruption. "Lily, why don't you go with Michael to the rest area? There's a TV there and you can order whatever you want for a snack." Once alone, Alexander took the photograph out of the drawer again. Isabella. It had been almost 10 years since he had last spoken her name out loud. She had left without explanations, leaving only a brief note and that photograph. Shortly after, he had met Rachel, and the rest was history. His phone vibrated with a text message from Rachel. "Very convincing, your little act at the club. But we both know you're lying. I'll see you tonight at the gala." Alexander smiled bitterly. Rachel had always been perceptive, but this time she was playing exactly as he wanted. The more she suspected, the more she would obsess over discovering the truth about Lily, and the less she would focus on her financial demands. Lily's laughter came from the rest area, probably watching some cartoon show. The sound, so pure and genuine, contrasted dramatically with the calculating environment that surrounded him. He approached the door and observed her for a moment. The girl had taken off her new shoes and had her feet tucked under her on the sofa, completely absorbed in the television. For an instant, Alexander allowed himself to imagine what it would have been like to have a real daughter. Someone who would fill these cold spaces with laughter, who would ask uncomfortable questions, who would look at him with eyes full of admiration instead of fear or greed. "Sir?" Michael interrupted his thoughts. "Mrs. Rachel's lawyer insists on speaking with you." Alexander straightened up, adjusting his tie. It was time to return to reality. "Tell him I'll see him tonight at the gala. And Michael, get Lily something sweet from the bakery on the corner. She's earned it." As he returned to his desk, Alexander couldn't help but think about the photo tucked away in the drawer. What would Isabella think of who he had become? Of the man who now used an innocent child as a pawn in his game of revenge? The answer, he suspected, wouldn't please him at all. Evening fell over New York City as the stylist finished preparing Lily for the gala. The lavender-colored dress Sophie had chosen made her look like a fairy tale princess, and her hair was elegantly styled in an updo with small natural flowers. "Can I see myself in the mirror?" Lily asked, practically jumping with excitement. The stylist led her to the full-length mirror in the office's rest area. The girl's eyes widened when she saw her reflection, and for a moment she was speechless. "I look like a real princess," she finally exclaimed, twirling to see how the dress moved. Alexander, who had been observing from the doorway, felt a strange mix of emotions. The girl really seemed to belong in his world now, but there was something deeply disturbing about this transformation. "Mr. Montgomery," Lily called, interrupting his thoughts. "Do you think my mom could see me like this just for a tiny moment?" "No," he responded, more harshly than he intended. Softening his tone, he added, "You know we can't risk it, but we'll take pictures and you can show them to her later." Lily's smile faltered slightly, but she nodded bravely. "Okay, can you tell me more about the party? Will there be other children?" "It's a charity gala," Alexander explained, sitting in one of the armchairs. "There will be mainly adults, important people from the city. I need you to be on your best behavior." "Like a true lady," Lily recited, repeating the words Sophie had taught her that morning. "Exactly," Alexander nodded. "And remember, if anyone asks you questions about my mom, I say she's in Boston and I don't want to talk about her," Lily completed. Then, in a smaller voice, she added, "Mr. Montgomery, why did the lady at the restaurant look at me like that? As if she was angry with me?" Alexander tensed. "Rachel, she's complicated. You shouldn't worry about her. Was she your wife? Is that why she's sad?" "Sad?" Alexander frowned. "I'm not sad." "Yes, you are," Lily insisted with the certainty of children. "You can see it in your eyes. Like when my mom says she's fine, but I know something hurts her." The observation left him momentarily speechless. How could this child see through the facade he had so carefully constructed? Michael entered at that moment, saving him from having to respond. "The car is ready, sir, and—" He lowered his voice. "Mrs. Rachel has already arrived at the event with her lawyer." Alexander stood up, adjusting his bow tie. "Good. It's time to go, Lily." As they walked towards the elevator, Lily stumbled slightly in her new shoes. Instinctively, Alexander held her arm to prevent her from falling. "Thank you, Dad," she said, and for the first time the words sounded natural on her lips. During the descent to the parking lot, Alexander noticed that Lily was biting her lip, a gesture he had observed when she was nervous. "Are you scared?" he asked, surprising himself with the concern in his voice. "A little," she admitted. "What if I do something wrong? What if I don't help you solve your problems?" Alexander felt as if something was twisting in his chest. "Don't think about that. Just be yourself." "But I thought I had to pretend to be someone else," she replied, confused. The response hit him like a slap of reality. What had he become? What was he doing with this innocent child? The elevator reached the parking lot, and Michael opened the car door. Before getting in, Lily stopped and looked at Alexander. "You know what? My mom always says that the truth is like the sun. Even if you cover it, it always finds a way to come out." The words hung in the air as they got into the car. Alexander looked out the window at the city lights that were beginning to turn on, wondering if tonight the truth would find its way through the shadows he himself had created. The Plaza Hotel glittered under the city's nightlights. A line of luxury cars extended from the main entrance, where New York's elite descended amidst camera flashes and murmurs of expectation. Alexander's Mercedes stopped in front of the majestic marble staircase. "Remember," Alexander whispered to Lily before Michael opened the door, "walk slowly, smile softly, and I'm a true lady," she completed, though her voice trembled slightly. The flashes began as soon as they set foot outside the car. Lily instinctively shrank from the blinding light, and without thinking she sought Alexander's hand. He, surprised by the gesture, automatically took it, feeling how small and fragile her hand was in his. "Mr. Montgomery, is it true you have a secret daughter? What does Mrs. Rachel say about this discovery? Why did you keep the child a secret for so long?" Questions rained from all directions. Alexander maintained his neutral expression, but he noticed that Lily was drawing closer to him, seeking protection. "My daughter and I prefer to maintain our privacy," he responded with a calculated smile. "Tonight we're here to support the Foundation's noble cause." Upon entering the main hall, the contrast between the exterior chaos and the interior elegance was notable. Murano crystal chandeliers sparkled from the ceilings, and the music of a chamber orchestra floated in the perfumed air. "It's like a real palace," Lily whispered, her eyes scanning the marble columns and ceiling frescoes. "Mr. Montgomery," a familiar voice interrupted them. It was Charles Russell, Rachel's lawyer. "What an interesting surprise you've given us." Alexander felt Lily tighten her grip on his hand. "Charles, how nice to see you. Have you met my daughter?" The lawyer studied Lily with calculating eyes. "I hadn't had the pleasure, although I must say the resemblance is peculiar." "Genes are mysterious, aren't they?" Alexander replied with a tense smile. "Indeed. By the way, I was wondering if we could discuss some details about the current legal situation, considering this new development." "Not tonight," Alexander cut him off. "I'm here to spend time with my daughter." Charles smiled maliciously. "Of course. Although I wonder why you never mentioned her existence during the divorce proceedings. That could be considered concealment of relevant information." Before Alexander could respond, Lily spoke up. "Excuse me, sir, but you're stepping on my dress." The lawyer stepped back, surprised by the intervention. At that moment, the orchestra began to play a waltz. "If you'll excuse us," Alexander said, "I promised my daughter a dance." He led Lily to the dance floor, where other couples were already moving to the rhythm of the music. He lifted her slightly, allowing her feet to rest on his. "Thank you," he murmured as they began to move with the music. "You were very clever there." "I don't like that man," she replied simply. "He talks like the snakes in movies." Alexander couldn't help but let out a small laugh. "You're more perceptive than you seem." As they danced, he noticed that several eyes were following them. Rachel, from a corner of the room, observed them with a glass of champagne in hand, whispering something to her lawyer. Other guests disguised their curiosity behind apparently casual conversations. "Why is everyone looking at us like that?" Lily asked. "Because they're not used to seeing me happy," Alexander responded without thinking. The answer surprised him as much as it did the girl. Where had that come from? "And are you?" she asked. "Happy?" Alexander looked into Lily's eyes, so full of innocence and genuine curiosity. For a moment, the weight of his plan, his revenge, everything he had built seemed overwhelming. He began, but was interrupted by the sound of breaking glass. Rachel had dropped her glass, and now she was approaching them with determined steps, her red dress waving like a war flag. The real battle was about to begin. Rachel stopped in front of them, her presence interrupting the waltz like a dark cloud blocking the sun. The music continued, but around them a circle of silence had formed, the guests pretending not to observe while absorbing every detail. Alexander, her voice was soft but as sharp as broken glass, would you grant me a moment? In private. Lily instinctively clung to Alexander's arm, but he knew he couldn't avoid this confrontation. He leaned towards the girl and whispered, "Stay with Michael. I'll be back in a moment." Michael appeared instantly, as if he had been waiting for the signal. As he walked away with Rachel towards a side terrace, Alexander noticed that Charles Russell was discreetly following them. The night air was cool, and New York City glittered below them like a sea of lights. Rachel waited until the glass doors closed behind them before speaking. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" she began, her voice trembling with contained anger. "That you could present any girl and pass her off as your daughter?" Alexander maintained his neutral expression. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please," Rachel let out a bitter laugh. "I hired private investigators. They've been following you all day. I know exactly where you got that girl from." Alexander's heart raced, but his face betrayed no emotion. "And what do you think you've discovered?" "The Bronx," Rachel pronounced as if the word were poison. "A tenement in the Bronx. A sick mother. How much did you pay her? How much does it cost to rent a daughter these days?" Charles Russell approached, holding a tablet. "We have photographs, Alexander, of your visit this morning, of the transformation at the boutique. Everything. We also have something more interesting," Rachel continued, her smile turning predatory. "Hospital records. The girl's mother has a rather serious condition, doesn't she? It would be a shame if something were to interrupt her treatment." Alexander took a threatening step towards her. "You wouldn't dare." "Wouldn't I?" Rachel replied, not backing down. "To expose your farce? To show the world the kind of man you really are? Or are you more concerned about what might happen to that poor woman when the hospital discovers certain irregularities in her payments?" Inside the hall, through the glass doors, Alexander could see Lily talking with Michael. The girl looked frequently in his direction, concern evident on her face. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice low and controlled. "What I've always wanted," Rachel responded. "My fair share, 50% of everything, and I want you to publicly admit that you tried to deceive everyone with this lost daughter farce. That would destroy my reputation." "Exactly," Rachel smiled. "Like you destroyed mine when you accused me of infidelity in front of all our friends." Charles intervened, his voice professionally neutral. "We have the documents prepared. We can resolve this right now, discreetly, or we can let the press enjoy the scandal." Alexander looked back towards the hall. Lily was now alone. Michael had been called away by another guest. The girl looked small and vulnerable amid so much luxury and falsehood. "Give me an hour," he finally responded. "I need to get the girl out of here first." 30 minutes, Rachel countered, "and if you try anything—" "I won't," Alexander cut her off. "But don't involve the girl or her mother in this. It's between you and me." Rachel studied him for a moment, as if trying to decipher if there was anything more behind his apparent surrender. 30 minutes, she repeated. Not a second more. As he returned to the hall, Alexander felt the weight of each step. How had it come to this? At what point had his desire for revenge turned into something that could hurt an innocent child and her sick mother? Lily greeted him with a smile that broke his heart. "Is everything okay, Mr. Dad?" "No," he responded honestly, surprising himself. "It's not okay and we need to talk." Alexander led Lily to a small side room, away from the bustle of the party. It was an elegant but intimate room, with antique portraits on the walls and large windows overlooking a moonlit garden. Michael discreetly followed them, staying near the door to ensure their privacy. "Did I do something wrong?" Lily asked, her voice small and worried. The lavender dress now seemed too heavy on her shoulders, as if all the pretense was finally taking its toll on her. Alexander knelt in front of her, coming to her eye level. For the first time that day, perhaps for the first time in years, he completely dropped his mask. "No, Lily, you haven't done anything wrong," he began, his voice breaking slightly. "It's me who has been doing things wrong, very wrong." The girl looked at him with those eyes that seemed to see right through all his defenses. "Is it because of the lady in the red dress? She seems very angry." "Rachel, she knows the truth. She knows you're not really my daughter," Alexander admitted, feeling each word like a weight on his conscience. "And she's threatening to do things that could hurt your mum." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "My mum? But she's sick. She needs her medicine. I know. Alexander took the girl's small hands in his. And it's my fault. I got you into this. I got you both into this terrible game because of my own selfishness. What's going to happen now? Lily asked, a tear sliding down her cheek. Alexander took a silk handkerchief from his pocket and gently wiped away the tear. Rachel wants me to sign some papers, to give her half of everything I have, and she wants me to say publicly that I lied about you. And that will help my mum? The question, so simple yet so profound, hit Alexander like a punch in the stomach. Here was this child, concerned only for her mother's well-being while he had been obsessed with his revenge and his pride. Yes, he answered after a moment. If I do what Rachel asks, she won't interfere with your mother's treatment. Lily nodded slowly, processing the information. Then, to Alexander's surprise, she moved closer and hugged him. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know you didn't want to lose your money. Alexander was paralyzed for a moment, overwhelmed by the purity of that gesture. This child, whom he had tried to use as a piece in his chess game, was offering him comfort. The money doesn't matter, he finally replied, returning the hug. I've realized that there are much more important things. They separated, and Alexander noticed that Michael was discreetly approaching. Sir, Mrs. Rachel is asking for you. The time— I know, Alexander interrupted. He turned to Lily. I need you to stay here with Michael while I sort this out. Is that okay? The girl nodded bravely, though her eyes were still wet. Can I take off my shoes? My feet hurt. Alexander couldn't help but smile. Of course you can. And Michael will bring you some hot chocolate, right, Michael? Of course, sir, the assistant replied, showing an unusual warmth. Before leaving the room, Alexander paused and looked at Lily one more time. The girl had taken off her shoes and was sitting on an elegant sofa, her bare feet swinging without reaching the floor. At that moment, he had a clarity that had been eluding him all day. Lily, he called softly. Thank you. For what? She asked, confused. For teaching me something I had forgotten a long time ago, that the truth, as your mother says, always finds its way. With those words, Alexander left the room, his mind already working on a new plan. But this time, it wouldn't be a plan born of revenge and pride, but of something very different. Rachel and Charles were waiting on the same terrace, the night air now colder than before. New York City glittered beneath them, indifferent to the drama unfolding in the heights of the Plaza Hotel. 23 minutes, Rachel announced, consulting her diamond watch. I was starting to think you'd run away. Alexander walked to the terrace railing, his figure silhouetted against the night sky. For the first time in a long time, he felt strangely at peace. You know, Rachel, for months I've been consumed by hatred, he began, his voice calm but firm. I convinced myself that you deserved to suffer as I suffered when I discovered your lies. Rachel tensed. I didn't come here to listen to your— But today, Alexander continued, ignoring her interruption, an 8-year-old girl taught me more about dignity and love than all our years together. He turned to face them. Charles had taken out the documents and was holding them like a shield. Are you going to sign or not? The lawyer asked, impatient. Yes, Alexander replied, surprising them both. I'm going to sign, but on my terms. Rachel let out a sarcastic laugh. You're not in a position to set terms. On the contrary, Alexander replied, taking out his phone. I have some very interesting recordings here of you threatening a sick mother and her daughter. What do you think the media would say about that? Rachel's face paled. You wouldn't dare. Wouldn't I? A few hours ago, no. But now I have something more important than my pride or my revenge. Charles intervened, his professional voice hiding his nervousness. What do you propose? Alexander approached the table where the documents were. First, you'll guarantee in writing that Sarah's medical treatment will continue without interruptions, with all expenses covered. Second, you'll establish an educational trust for Lily. Have you gone mad? Rachel exclaimed. You want me to help the child you used to deceive me? No, Alexander replied calmly. I want to help the child who helped me see the truth about myself, and you'll do it because deep down, Rachel, I know you're not the monster I pretended you were, just as I'm not the villain you think I am. A heavy silence fell over the terrace. Rachel studied Alexander as if seeing him for the first time. Why? She finally asked. Why this sudden change? Alexander thought of Lily, sitting in the room with her bare feet, more concerned about her mother than all the money and power surrounding her. Because today, I remembered something I had forgotten a long time ago, he replied. I remembered how it feels to have a purpose beyond oneself. He approached the desk and took the documents. We'll modify these terms now. And when we're done, I'm going to do something else. What? Charles asked, taking out his pen. I'm going to tell the truth, the whole truth, not because you're forcing me, but because it's the right thing to do. Rachel stared at him for a long moment. Something in her expression softened slightly. You were always a better person than I wanted to admit, she finally said. Until you stopped being one. And you were never as bad as I convinced myself you were, Alexander replied. Maybe it's time we both remember that. As Charles began to modify the documents, Alexander looked towards the hall through the glass doors. He could see Lily in the distance. Now Rachel and Charles were waiting on the same terrace, the night air now colder than before. New York City glittered beneath them, indifferent to the drama unfolding in the heights of the Plaza Hotel. 23 minutes, Rachel announced, consulting her diamond watch. I was beginning to think you'd run away. Alexander walked to the terrace railing, his figure silhouetted against the night sky. For the first time in a long time, he felt strangely at peace. You know, Rachel, for months I've been consumed by hatred, he began, his voice calm but firm. I convinced myself that you deserved to suffer as I suffered when I discovered your lies. Rachel tensed. I didn't come here to listen to your... But today, Alexander continued, ignoring her interruption, an 8-year-old girl taught me more about dignity and love than all our years together. He turned to face them. Charles had taken out the documents and was holding them like a shield. Are you going to sign or not? The lawyer asked, impatient. Yes, Alexander replied, surprising both of them. I'm going to sign, but on my terms. Rachel let out a sarcastic laugh. You're not in a position to set terms. On the contrary, Alexander replied, taking out his phone. I have some very interesting recordings here of you threatening a sick mother and her daughter. What do you think the media would say about that? Rachel's face paled. You wouldn't dare. Wouldn't I? A few hours ago, no. But now I have something more important than my pride or my revenge. Charles intervened, his professional voice hiding his nervousness. What do you propose? Alexander approached the table where the documents were. First, you'll guarantee in writing that Sarah's medical treatment will continue without interruption, with all expenses covered. Second, you'll establish an educational trust for Lily. Have you gone mad? Rachel exclaimed. You want me to help the child you used to deceive me? No, Alexander replied calmly. I want to help the child who helped me see the truth about myself, and you'll do it because deep down, Rachel, I know you're not the monster I pretended you were, just as I'm not the villain you think I am. A heavy silence fell over the terrace. Rachel studied Alexander as if seeing him for the first time. Why? She finally asked. Why this sudden change? Alexander thought of Lily sitting in the room with her bare feet, more concerned about her mother than all the money and power that surrounded her. Because today, I remembered something I had forgotten a long time ago, he replied. I remembered what it feels like to have a purpose beyond oneself. He approached the desk and took the documents. We'll modify these terms now, and when we're done, I'm going to do something else. What? Charles asked, taking out his pen. I'm going to tell the truth, the whole truth, not because you're forcing me, but because it's the right thing to do. Rachel stared at him for a long moment. Something in her expression softened slightly. You were always a better person than I wanted to admit, she finally said, until you stopped being one. And you were never as bad as I convinced myself you were, Alexander replied. Maybe it's time we both remember that. As Charles began to modify the documents, Alexander looked towards the hall through the glass doors. He could see Lily in the distance, now laughing with a cup of hot chocolate in her hands. The image reminded him of another girl, many years ago, one who could have been his daughter if life had taken a different path. It was time to face that truth too. While Charles was drafting the modifications to the documents, Alexander returned to the main hall. The party continued its course, the orchestra played softly, and conversations flowed like the champagne circulating on silver trays. But to him, everything now seemed distant and unreal. He headed towards his makeshift office in the plaza, where he kept something he needed to retrieve. As he opened the drawer of his desk, the photograph that Lily had found earlier was waiting for him. Isabella smiled from the glossy paper, frozen in time. After all these years, he murmured to himself, you still appear in the most unexpected moments. Who is she? Rachel's voice startled him. She was standing in the doorway, her red dress reflecting the dim light of the lamp. For a moment, Alexander considered putting the photo away, keeping that secret buried as he had done for so long. But something had changed in him. Isabella, he replied, extending the photograph towards Rachel. I met her a year before I met you. Rachel took the photograph cautiously, as if it might burn her. Her eyes softened as she recognized something in the image. She looks like Lily, Alexander completed. That was the real reason I chose her. Not just because I needed a girl for my plan, but because when I saw her, it was like seeing the ghost of what could have been. Rachel sat in one of the armchairs, the photograph still in her hands. You never told me about her. I never told anyone about her, Alexander admitted, sitting across from Rachel. Isabella was pregnant when she left. I never knew if you had a daughter, Rachel finished, finally understanding. That's why this whole theater with Lily affected you so much. Alexander nodded, feeling the weight of years of silence leave his shoulders. When I first saw her, with those same eyes, that same gesture when smiling, I convinced myself that she was the perfect instrument for my revenge. But in reality, I was trying to fill a void that I hadn't even allowed myself to recognize. Did you ever look for her? Rachel asked, her voice surprisingly gentle. I tried at first, but she didn't want to be found. She left a letter saying she needed to get away, that she couldn't live the life I had planned for us. He paused, lost in memories. When I met you, I thought I had left all that behind. Rachel put the photograph on the desk, and I thought I had found the perfect man. We both deceived ourselves, didn't we? Maybe that was our mistake, Alexander reflected, trying to be perfect instead of being honest. A soft knock on the door interrupted the moment. It was Michael. Sir, the girl is asking for you. She's worried. Alexander stood up, but before leaving, he turned to Rachel. There's something else I need to do tonight, and I need your help. Rachel looked at him curiously. My help? For what? To do the right thing for once. Not for revenge, not for pride, but for Lily and her mother. He paused for a moment, considering his next words. And also for Isabella, wherever she is. Rachel stood up, smoothing her dress with an automatic gesture. You know this will change everything, right? Once the truth comes out. I know, Alexander replied. But as Lily said, the truth is like the sun, it always finds its way. As they walked back to the main hall, Alexander felt that each step was taking him not only towards Lily, but also towards a version of himself that he had lost long ago. A version that perhaps could still be redeemed. The main hall of the Plaza Hotel bustled with the energy of New York's high society. Conversations mingled with the orchestra's music, creating a symphony of power and privilege. Alexander observed the scene from the entrance, aware that he was about to alter the course of many lives, including his own. Are you sure about this? Rachel asked, remaining by his side, her red dress like a warning signal. For the first time in a long time, yes, he replied, adjusting his bow tie. Michael, where's Lily? In the side room, sir, as you requested. Sarah, her mother, has just arrived. Alexander turned in surprise. Sarah? I didn't. It was me, Rachel interrupted. I had her brought here. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. For a moment, Alexander saw in his ex-wife's eyes a glimpse of the woman he had fallen in love with years ago. He nodded silently, grateful. Sarah appeared in the doorway of the side room, visibly uncomfortable in such a luxurious environment. She wore a simple but dignified dress, probably the best she had. Beside her, Lily, still in her lavender dress, but now with her shoes back on, hugged her tightly. Mr. Montgomery, Sarah greeted with a trembling voice. Mrs. Rachel insisted I come, although I don't understand. You'll understand soon, Alexander replied. He turned to Michael. Is everything ready? Yes, sir. The journalists are in place and the microphone is prepared. Alexander took a deep breath and walked to the center of the hall. The orchestra stopped playing and an expectant silence spread through the room. All eyes turned to him, waiting for the next act of the drama that had been unfolding all night. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice clear and firm, I have gathered you here tonight under false pretenses. A murmur ran through the room. Lily, from her position next to her mother, looked at him with a mixture of concern and curiosity. Many of you will have heard rumors about my supposed lost daughter, he continued. Those rumors, which I myself helped spread, are false. The murmur intensified. Camera flashes began to go off. "This child," he pointed towards Lily, "is not my biological daughter. She is an extraordinary girl who, along with her mother, became entangled in a plan born of my wounded pride and desire for revenge." Sarah hugged Lily more tightly, but the girl kept her eyes fixed on Alexander, as if understanding that something important was happening. "But today," Alexander continued, his voice softening, "this little one has taught me more about honesty, dignity, and true love than all my years in the business world." He approached where Sarah and Lily were standing, aware of every gaze that followed him. "I owe you both an apology," he said, addressing them directly but allowing everyone to hear. "For involving you in my personal problems, for using your need for my own ends." Then he turned to Rachel, who remained nearby, her expression unreadable. "And I owe you an apology too, Rachel. You weren't the monster I convinced myself you were, just as I wasn't the saint I pretended to be." The silence in the hall was absolute. Even the waiters had stopped, champagne trays forgotten in their hands. "But tonight is not just about apologies," Alexander continued. "It's about doing the right thing." He took an envelope from his jacket and handed it to Sarah. "This is the trust that will guarantee the medical treatment you need and Lily's education. Not as part of a deal, not as payment for your silence, but because it's the right thing to do." Tears were flowing freely down Sarah's cheeks. Lily, however, was smiling. "I knew you were good," the girl said, loud enough for several nearby guests to hear. "You were just a little lost." The silence that followed Alexander's confession was broken by the sound of solitary applause. To everyone's surprise, it came from Charles Russell, Rachel's lawyer, who had been observing the entire scene from a corner of the room. "Bravo, Alexander," he said, approaching with measured steps. "A touching spectacle, but I wonder if your shareholders will appreciate this demonstration of honesty as much." Rachel stepped forward, her red dress waving like a cape. "The shareholders will appreciate the truth more than a prolonged scandal, don't you think, Charles?" The murmurs in the room increased. Journalists were frantically writing on their devices, while photographers captured every moment. New York high society would have a topic of conversation for months. Lily gently released herself from her mother's embrace and walked towards Alexander. Her lavender dress, though still elegant, showed the wrinkles of a long and emotional night. "Does this mean I don't have to pretend anymore?" she asked, her voice clear amidst the general murmur. Alexander knelt in front of her, ignoring the cameras capturing the moment. "No, little one, no more pretending. No. And I thank you for teaching me that the truth, even if it hurts, is better than the most elaborate lie. And my mum will be okay," she insisted, her big eyes full of concern. "Your mum will receive the best treatment," Rachel intervened, surprising everyone. "I'll personally make sure of it." Sarah, who had been observing everything with silent tears, approached Rachel. "Mum, I don't understand. Why?" Rachel looked at the photograph she was still holding in her hand, the image of Isabella, before responding. "Because sometimes we need to remember our humanity, and your daughter helped us all do just that." The guests began to disperse, forming small groups discussing the night's events in low voices. The orchestra, sensing the mood, began to play a comforting melody softly. Michael discreetly approached Alexander. "Sir, the press is requesting a formal conference, and the board of directors is already convening an emergency meeting for tomorrow." "Let them wait," Alexander replied, not taking his eyes off Lily, who was now yawning discreetly. "There are more important things now." He turned to Sarah. "Would you allow me to take you home? It's been a very long night, especially for Lily." Sarah nodded, but before they could move, the girl spoke again. "Mr. Montgomery, will I see you again?" The question, so simple and direct, hit Alexander with unexpected force. He looked at Sarah, seeking her approval before responding. "If your mother agrees, I'd like to continue being part of your lives, not as a false father but as a friend, someone who owes you much more than money or promises. You could come see my school plays," Lily suggested with a tired smile, this time without having to pretend. Rachel, who had been observing the exchange, approached Sarah. "We have a lot to discuss about the treatment and the trust. How about we meet tomorrow? No lawyers, no pretenses, just two women talking." As the group headed towards the exit, the last guests watched them with a mixture of amazement and curiosity. The story that would circulate in social circles wouldn't be one of scandal or revenge, but of something deeper and more meaningful. In the lobby, as they waited for Michael to bring the car around, Lily took off her elegant shoes again. "You know," she said, looking at the shoes in her hands, "they're very pretty, but I prefer my old sneakers." "Authenticity is always more comfortable than pretense," Alexander replied, surprising himself with the wisdom of his words. The following morning dawned with the headlines Alexander had expected. "Tycoon confesses elaborate hoax, the Montgomery deception, the girl who changed a millionaire's heart." Photographs from the Gala occupied the front pages of all the society papers, but the one that caught the most attention was the image of Lily, barefoot and smiling, next to a visibly transformed Alexander. In his Wall Street office, Alexander watched the city wake up while waiting for the start of the board meeting. Michael entered with a cup of coffee and the day's newspapers. "Mrs. Sarah called," Michael informed. "Lily arrived at school safely this morning. She says her classmates are impressed because she was in the papers." Alexander smiled, remembering how naturally the girl had handled the whole situation. "How is Sarah?" "She has her first appointment at the new clinic this afternoon. Mrs. Rachel has already coordinated all the paperwork." A knock on the door interrupted the conversation. Rachel entered, dressed in an impeccable business suit, very different from the dramatic red dress of the night before. "The board of directors is waiting," she announced, "and they're not happy." "Since when do you care what the board thinks?" Alexander asked, raising an eyebrow. "Since I decided to help you face them," she replied, surprising him. "After all, I'm still a major shareholder." Alexander looked at her curiously. "Why would you do that?" Rachel approached the window, observing the city next to him. "Because last night I saw something I thought you had lost a long time ago, your humanity. And because that child reminded me why I fell in love with you in the first place. My ability to spectacularly mess things up," he joked, trying to lighten the moment. "Your ability to do the right thing, even if it's late and in the most complicated way possible," she corrected with a small smile. Michael coughed discreetly. "Sir, this also arrived." He extended a simple envelope without a return address. Alexander opened it curiously. Inside was an old photograph and a brief note. His face paled as he recognized the handwriting. "Isabella?" Rachel asked, noticing his reaction. Alexander nodded, reading the note silently. After a moment, he looked up, his eyes bright with contained tears. "She says she saw the news, that I finally found what I was looking for, though not in the way I expected." He paused, taking a breath. "And that our daughter is fine, that she's happy." Rachel took the photograph that accompanied the note. In it, a young woman of about 17 smiled at the camera, her eyes identical to her mother's. "She looks like you," she said softly. "She looks like Lily," Alexander corrected. "Now I understand why seeing her affected me so much. Somehow fate gave me a second chance to do things right." "Are you going to look for them?" Rachel asked. Alexander carefully put away the note and photograph. "No, Isabella is right. Sometimes the best love you can give is to respect the distance others need." He looked towards the boardroom where the executives were waiting. "Besides, I have a promise to keep to a little girl who taught me more about truth in one day than all these years of corporate lies." "Speaking of promises," Michael interjected, "Lily mentioned something about a school play next week. Apparently she plays a warrior princess who saves her kingdom by being honest." Alexander and Rachel exchanged an amused look. "What?" he asked. "Does life imitate art, or does art imitate life?" "In this case," Rachel replied, heading towards the boardroom, "I think life has surpassed any play." The boardroom vibrated with contained tension. The members of the board of directors, seated around the enormous mahogany table, looked at Alexander with a mixture of disbelief and disapproval. The screens on the walls displayed graphs of the company's stock, which had experienced a slight drop following the previous night's events. "Do you have any idea of the damage you've caused to the company's reputation?" Rodriguez, the oldest board member, began. "Years of building an image of integrity and professionalism for what? To throw it away over an attack of conscience?" Rachel, strategically seated to Alexander's right, intervened before he could respond. "If I may, I think you're approaching this from the wrong angle." "Oh, really?" Rodriguez replied sarcastically. "And what would be the right angle to view this disaster?" Alexander stood up slowly, resting his hands on the table. "The human angle," he responded with a calmness that surprised everyone. "For years we've prided ourselves on being a company that values integrity. Last night, for the first time, I truly practiced what we preach." At the cost of millions in market value? Another board member protested. To the benefit of something much more valuable, Rachel interrupted, projecting a presentation she had prepared overnight onto the screens. Observe this. The screens displayed newspaper headlines and online reports, not just the expected articles about the scandal, but also stories about redemption, honesty, and personal transformation. Social media was full of positive comments about the courage to admit mistakes publicly. In the last 12 hours, Rachel continued, we've received more positive mentions than in the last 6 months combined. People are tired of faceless corporations and untouchable executives. They want to see humanity, authenticity. Michael, who had been monitoring his tablet, looked up. Gentlemen, the stocks are beginning to recover, and 3 of our biggest clients have just confirmed that they maintain their trust in the company, specifically citing the integrity demonstrated in difficult times. Alexander took control of the presentation. I'm not here to apologize for telling the truth. I'm here to propose a new path. He projected a new set of slides. This is the plan for the new corporate social responsibility program that Rachel and I have designed. The screens showed details of an initiative to support low-income families with medical needs, starting with Sarah's case as a pilot project. What began as a personal mistake, Alexander explained, can be transformed into something positive for the entire community. A reflective silence fell over the room. Finally, Rodriguez spoke again, but his tone had changed. And the girl, Lily, what role does she play in all this? None, Alexander replied firmly. She will return to her normal life, with the support she needs but out of the public eye. We will never use anyone, especially a child, for our corporate purposes again. Rachel smiled discreetly, remembering how this same man just days ago had planned to use Lily as a piece in his corporate chess game. Gentlemen, Alexander continued, yesterday an 8-year-old girl taught me that true strength isn't in keeping up appearances, but in having the courage to be honest, even when it costs us. I propose that we turn that lesson into the new foundation of our company. Alexander's phone vibrated with a text message from Sarah. Lily asks if she'll be able to see you at her school play. She plays a princess who saves her kingdom with the truth. As the board members discussed the details of the new program, Alexander looked out the window at the city, stretching under the blue New York sky. Somewhere out there, a little girl was in her classroom, probably practicing her lines for a school play, not knowing that she had changed not only her life, but the lives of everyone around her. He approached the door and observed her for a moment. The girl had left her new shoes aside and had her feet tucked under her on the sofa, completely absorbed in the television. For an instant, Alexander allowed himself to imagine what it would have been like to have a real daughter. Someone who would fill these cold spaces with laughter, who would ask uncomfortable questions, who would look at him with eyes full of admiration instead of fear or greed. Sir, Michael interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Rachel's lawyer insists on speaking with you. Alexander straightened up, adjusting his tie. It was time to return to reality. Tell him I'll see him tonight at the gala. And Michael, get Lily something sweet from the bakery on the corner. She's earned it. As he returned to his desk, Alexander couldn't help but think about the photo tucked away in the drawer. What would Isabella think of who he had become? Of the man who now used an innocent child as a pawn in his game of revenge? The answer, he suspected, wouldn't please him at all. A week after the gala, the auditorium of the public elementary school in the Bronx buzzed with activity. Parents settled into folding chairs, some holding cell phones ready to record, others fanning themselves with the event programs. In the last row, almost going unnoticed, Alexander and Rachel sat next to Michael. The contrast between their elegant suits and the modest surroundings was evident, but there was something different about their presence, a humility that hadn't existed before. Who would have thought we'd end up at a school play in the Bronx? Rachel whispered, observing the worn but clean curtain decorating the stage. Who would have thought we'd come together? Alexander replied, a small smile on his lips. Sarah, seated in front of them, turned with concern. I hope you don't mind how simple everything is. It's not like the galas you're used to. It's perfect, Rachel interrupted sincerely. Sometimes true elegance is in simplicity. The lights began to dim, and a murmur of expectation ran through the auditorium. Lily's teacher appeared in front of the curtain, holding a microphone that crackled slightly. Welcome to our presentation of The True Princess, she announced. An original play written by our third-grade students. The curtain opened, revealing a stage decorated with painted cardboard representing a castle. Lily appeared dressed with a golden paper crown and a simple but creative dress, very different from the elegant lavender dress from the gala. Long ago, Lily began with a clear and confident voice, in a kingdom where lies had become as common as the air they breathed, lived a princess who discovered that truth was the most powerful magic of all. Alexander felt a lump in his throat. The story, though simplified for children, resonated with a truth that touched him deeply. On stage, Lily played a princess who discovered that her kingdom was sick because no one dared to tell the truth. Through her honesty and courage, she began to heal not only her people, but also the hardened hearts of those around her. "She reminds me of someone," Rachel murmured, her eyes bright with contained tears. During the intermission, Michael discreetly checked his phone. "Sir, the medical aid program has already been approved by all departments. We can start next week." Alexander nodded, but his attention was on the stage, where Lily was preparing for her final scene. The girl saw him and discreetly waved, a genuine smile lighting up her face. "You know," Sarah commented quietly, "since that night at the gala, Lily has been different, more confident. She says that if a millionaire can admit his mistakes, we can all be brave and tell the truth." The play continued, reaching its climax when the princess confronted the royal council, revealing all the lies that had sickened the kingdom. Lily's words, though part of a school script, carried a special weight. "Sometimes," she declaimed, looking directly to where Alexander was seated, "we need someone small to remind us of the great truths we have forgotten." At the end of the play, as the audience applauded, Alexander noticed he wasn't the only one moved. Rachel was discreetly wiping away a tear, and even Michael seemed touched. Backstage after the presentation, Lily ran towards them, still wearing her paper crown. "Did you like it? Was I a good princess?" "The best," Alexander replied, kneeling to be at her eye level. "A princess who taught us all a very important lesson." "About telling the truth?" she asked, adjusting her crown. "About that and something more," Rachel intervened. "About how sometimes the wisest teachers come in the smallest packages." After the play, the school organized a small celebration in the courtyard. Simple tables decorated with colored crepe paper held homemade cakes and fruit punch. Children ran among the adults, still in their costumes, while parents proudly shared the photos they had taken. Alexander observed the scene with a new perspective. This world, so different from his of corporate meetings and charity galas, had an authenticity that deeply moved him. "Would you like some punch, Mr. Montgomery?" Sarah offered, approaching with a plastic cup. "I made it myself this morning." "Please call me Alexander," he replied, accepting the cup. "And thank you." "It's been years since I've had homemade punch." Rachel joined them, holding a plate with sweet bread. "Sarah, the play was wonderful. Did Lily help write the story?" "Yes," Sarah replied with pride. After that night, she came home with many ideas. The teacher says she's never seen her so inspired." Lily appeared running, now without her crown, but with contagious energy. "Look, the teacher gave us diplomas." She proudly showed a paper decorated with golden stars. "It's a very important recognition," Alexander said seriously, examining the diploma. "We should frame it." "Like the ones you have in your office?" Lily asked, remembering the titles and recognitions she had seen on the walls of the corporate penthouse. "No," he replied, smiling. "This one is more special. You earned this by being yourself." Michael, who had been discreetly in the background, approached with news. "Mrs. Sarah, I've just received confirmation. The clinic is ready to begin your new treatment next week." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." "Don't thank us," Rachel interrupted. "If anyone should be thankful here, it's us." She looked meaningfully at Lily. "Some angels come disguised as warrior princesses." Lily, who had been listening to the conversation, frowned thoughtfully. "Mr. Alexander, why do adults complicate things so much?" The question provoked laughter in the group, but Alexander considered it seriously. "I suppose sometimes we forget what's really important. We get lost in lies we believe are necessary. In pride we think we must defend. But the truth is easier," Lily insisted. "Like in my play. If everyone tells the truth, everything gets fixed." "Out of the mouths of babes," Rachel murmured, sharing a knowing look with Alexander. The afternoon began to fall over the school courtyard, painting the sky in golden and pink hues. The children continued playing, their laughter mixing with the adults' conversations. It was a moment of peace, of simplicity, so different from the tensions of the previous week. "You know," Lily said, as she nibbled on a piece of sweet bread, "I like the pretty dress and the shiny shoes, but I prefer this." "The sweet bread?" Alexander joked. "No," she replied, serious. Being like this all together without having to pretend anything. Sarah hugged her daughter, and for a moment no one spoke. The silence was full of shared understanding, of lessons learned and truths rediscovered. "Lily," Alexander finally said, "would you like to come next weekend to plant a garden on the terrace of my office? I think it needs a bit of real life among all that glass and steel." The girl's eyes lit up. "Can we put flowers of all colors? And maybe a small tree?" "Whatever you want," he replied. "It's time for that place to have a bit of the truth and beauty that you taught us to see." Saturday dawned with a special clarity over New York City. On the terrace of the corporate building, Alexander, dressed casually in jeans and a simple shirt, supervised the arrival of plants and gardening materials. It was the first time in years that anyone had seen him without a suit, and Michael still did double takes every time he passed by him. "Are you sure about this?" Rachel asked, who had arrived early to help, also dressed casually. "Converting the executive terrace into a garden?" "As sure as I was about hiring a child to pretend to be my daughter," Alexander joked, and then turned serious. "But this time, it's for the right reasons." The elevator opened, revealing Lily and Sarah. The girl wore small gardening overalls and gloves that were too big for her. Her eyes widened at the sight of the number of plants waiting to be planted. "There are so many," she exclaimed, running towards the containers full of colorful flowers. "Are they all for the terrace?" "And this," Alexander added, pointing to a corner where a small jacaranda tree waited. "I thought we could give this place a bit of purple shade." Michael appeared with a tray of lemonade and snacks. "The soil and tools are ready, sir. Shall we begin?" What followed was a morning unlike any other in the history of the corporate building. Lily directed operations with the same seriousness with which she had played her warrior princess, assigning tasks and deciding where each plant would go. "The roses here," she indicated, "because they need lots of sun, and the hydrangeas there, because my mum says they like shade." Rachel, with dirt on her cheeks and a genuine smile, worked alongside Sarah preparing spaces for the flowers. The social distance that once existed between them had vanished in the shared task. "You know," Rachel commented to Sarah as they planted some daisies, "I never thought I'd find so much peace doing something so simple." Sarah nodded understandingly. Sometimes the best medicines are the simplest ones. Alexander, meanwhile, struggled with the jacaranda tree under Lily's expert direction. "Deeper," she instructed. "The roots need space to grow strong." "Like truths," he replied, remembering her words about the sun and truth. By mid-morning, as the sun began to warm more strongly, Michael brought more refreshments and joined the work. His impeccable suit finally showed signs of labor, but he didn't seem to mind. "Sir," he said quietly to Alexander as he helped with some pots, "the board of directors is asking if you'll be ready for Monday's meeting." Alexander looked around the transformed terrace. Where once there was only concrete and metal, now a garden full of color and life flourished. Lily laughed as Rachel taught her how to properly water the plants, and Sarah watched with a serene smile. "I'll be more than ready," he replied. "In fact, I think we'll have the meeting here in the garden." "In the garden?" Michael looked scandalized. "But the protocol kept us locked in glass boxes for too long," Alexander interrupted. "It's time for this company to breathe fresh air, literally." Lily came running up, her cheeks red from effort and excitement. "Look, the first flowers are already coming out." Indeed, some buds were beginning to open under the morning sun. It was as if nature itself wanted to celebrate the transformation of the space. "Just like you," Rachel said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "These flowers are bringing life and color to a place that desperately needed it." "And truth," Lily added with the simple wisdom of children. "Flowers can't pretend to be what they're not. They can only be beautiful by being themselves." Alexander exchanged a meaningful look with Rachel. When was the last time either of them had allowed themselves to simply be who they were, without pretenses or masks? On Monday morning, the board members arrived at the top floor of the corporate building and stopped short. Instead of the usual boardroom with its mahogany table and leather chairs, they found a note directing them to the terrace. What they found there left them speechless. The once sterile space had been transformed into a lush garden. Elegant but informal outdoor chairs were arranged in a circle under the shade of the young jacaranda, and a side table offered freshly brewed coffee and traditional sweet bread. "Good morning," Alexander greeted, who was already waiting for them along with Rachel. "I thought we could benefit from a change of perspective. Is this appropriate?" Rodriguez asked, looking distrustfully at a butterfly that had landed on one of the nearby flowers. "What's more appropriate," Rachel replied, "than making important decisions surrounded by life and beauty?" As the executives took their seats, still bewildered, Michael began distributing folders with the new reports. But these were different too. Alongside the usual numbers and graphs, there were photographs of the new medical aid program and testimonials from the first families benefited. "As you can see," Alexander began, "our numbers have not only recovered after my public confession, but they've improved. Transparency and social responsibility are not just pretty words for the annual report, they are viable business strategies. And more importantly," Rachel added, "they are the right thing to do." A gentle breeze moved the flowers, bringing their fragrance to the meeting. It was impossible to maintain the usual corporate rigidity in such an environment. "This garden," Alexander continued, "was designed by an 8-year-old girl who taught me more about integrity and authenticity than all my years in the business world. Each plant here represents a simple but profound truth." He stood up and walked to the jacaranda. "This tree, for example. Lily insisted it needed deep roots to grow strong. Isn't that exactly what our company needs? Deep roots of honesty and purpose?" The board members began to visibly relax. Some were even smiling as the butterfly fluttered among the flowers. "Last month's sales show a 15% increase," Michael reported, projecting graphs on a mobile screen. "Positive mentions on social media have increased by 200%. And 3 new international investors have expressed interest in partnering with us, specifically citing our new transparency policy." "And all this started with a child?" one of the younger directors asked, genuinely intrigued. "All this started with a lie," Alexander corrected. "But it transformed into something beautiful, thanks to a child's truth." Rachel approached one of the newly bloomed roses. "Sometimes we need someone outside our world to show us what we've been doing wrong. And sometimes that someone is 8 years old and has a heart wiser than all of us put together." The meeting continued, but it was different from any they had had before. Decisions were made not just based on numbers, but on real impact. Plans were discussed not just in terms of profits, but of social benefit. At the end of the session, as the directors were leaving, more than one stopped to admire the flowers or to breathe deeply the perfumed garden air. "Alexander," Rodriguez called before leaving, "tell that girl she's done an extraordinary job here. Not just with the flowers." "I'll tell her," Alexander replied, smiling, "though I think she already knows." When everyone had gone, Rachel approached Alexander, who was contemplating the city from the now flourishing terrace. "You know what's most ironic?" she asked. "I tried to use Lily to save your fortune, and in the end she saved something much more valuable." "What?" "Our souls," Rachel replied simply, as a gentle rain of purple petals fell from the jacaranda, as if nature itself was nodding in agreement. A sunny afternoon 2 weeks after the terrace's transformation, Sarah was leaving her last therapy session at the private clinic. Her face showed a healthy color she hadn't had in months, and her steps were firmer. "The results are promising," the doctor explained to Alexander and Rachel, who had insisted on accompanying her. "The new treatment is working better than expected." Lily, who had been patiently waiting in the waiting room working on her homework, looked up at hearing the good news. Her smile lit up the room. "Does that mean my mom is going to get better?" she asked, running to hug Sarah. "It means," the doctor replied, smiling, "that your mom is responding very well to the treatment, and part of that success is due to her being more relaxed, without financial worries interfering with her recovery." Rachel, who had been reviewing the medical reports, looked up. "Doctor, how many more people in New York are in a similar situation? Families who need treatments but can't afford them?" The doctor sighed. "Thousands. Unfortunately, there are more people who need help than those who can access adequate treatments." Alexander and Rachel exchanged a significant look. It was the same look they had shared on the terrace during the board meeting. "Lily," Alexander called, "do you remember when you told me that truth is like the sun, that it always finds its way?" The girl nodded, curious to know where this conversation was going. "Well, I think it's time we let that light reach more people," he continued. "Rachel and I have been talking. How would you like it if we expanded the medical aid program? If we helped more families like yours?" Lily's eyes widened. "Could you do that?" "We're already doing it," Rachel replied, taking a tablet from her purse. "Look at this." On the screen appeared plans for a new community medical center to be built in the Bronx. The proposed name for the center shone at the top of the document: Lily Medical Center, where truth heals. Sarah brought a hand to her mouth, moved. "But why?" "Because your daughter taught us that true wealth isn't in what we accumulate," Alexander explained, "but in what we share. And because every time I see the flowers on the terrace, I remember that the most authentic beauty grows in the most unexpected places." "Can I help?" Lily asked, her face lit up with enthusiasm. "Can I plant a garden there too?" "Actually," Rachel intervened, "we wanted to ask you something more important. Would you like to be part of the committee that will decide which families will receive help first?" "But I'm just a kid," Lily replied, suddenly shy. "You're a kid," Alexander confirmed, "who taught us to see the truth when we were blind." "I think that's exactly the perspective we need." Michael, who had been discreetly in the background as always, approached with a folder. "We also have this," he said, handing it to Sarah. Inside were official documents: the educational trust for Lily, guaranteeing her education through college, and papers naming Sarah as an advisor to the new medical aid program. "We want you both to be part of this," Rachel explained. "Not as beneficiaries, but as leaders, because sometimes it takes having lived through a situation to truly understand how to help others going through the same thing." Lily looked at the plans for the medical center and then at her mother, who was nodding with tears in her eyes. "Can we put a jacaranda tree there too?" she finally asked. "So everyone remembers that beautiful things can grow anywhere." 6 months later, the land that was once an empty lot in the Bronx had been transformed. The Lily Medical Center stood as a modern but welcoming building, its walls painted in soft, warm tones. As Lily had suggested, a young jacaranda tree stood in the center of the front garden, surrounded by flowers of all colors. It was inauguration day, and a small crowd had gathered in front of the building. Families from the neighborhood, medical staff, company executives, and journalists waited for the ribbon-cutting moment. "Are you nervous?" Alexander asked Lily, who was holding the ceremonial scissors with slightly trembling hands. "A little," she admitted, smoothing her new dress, one she had chosen herself, much simpler than the lavender dress from that night at the gala. "What if I'm not important enough to do this?" Rachel, who had been supervising the final details, approached. "Lily, do you remember what you taught us about truth? That it's like the sun?" "Exactly. And you were the ray of sunshine that illuminated our lives. There's no one more important to inaugurate this center." Sarah, now noticeably healthier and stronger, watched the scene with pride. As director of the center's social assistance program, she had been working tirelessly to identify the families who needed help the most. Michael approached with a tablet. "Sir, we have 50 families confirmed to start treatments next week, and the medical scholarship program has received over 200 applications." "See?" Lily said, pointing to the numbers on the tablet. "You weren't the only ones who needed a little truth in your lives." The journalists began to take positions as Alexander approached the podium. His speech was different from any other he had given before. "6 months ago," he began, "I tried to use a lie to protect my fortune. But fate, in the form of an extraordinary girl, taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or properties." He paused, looking at Lily. "It's measured in the ability to do the right thing, to admit our mistakes, and to use our resources to help others. This medical center isn't my legacy or that of my company. It's the legacy of a little truth warrior who showed us the way with her pure heart." Rachel took the microphone. "As part of our ongoing commitment, we announced today that the program will expand to other communities. Every center we open will carry the same spirit of truth and service that Lily taught us." When the time came for the ribbon cutting, Lily stepped forward. But before cutting, she stopped and looked at the crowd. "Do you know why I planted a jacaranda here?" she asked, her voice clear in the microphone. "Because when its flowers fall, it looks like it's raining purple. And sometimes we need it to rain beauty in places where people have forgotten to look up." With those words, she cut the ribbon. Applause erupted, and a gentle breeze made some purple petals fall from the jacaranda, as if nature itself wanted to celebrate the moment. Inside the center, the walls were decorated with bright murals painted by local artists. One in particular caught the eye, a small girl planting a seed under a radiant sun, with the phrase, "Truth like a seed, only needs a little love to flourish." As guests toured the facilities of the new medical center, a woman stopped in front of the mural of the girl planting the seed. Her eyes, identical to Lily's, moistened slightly. She carried a professional camera and a press badge, but something in her posture suggested she was there for more than just a news story. Alexander, who was passing by supervising the final details, stopped short when he saw her. Although years had passed, he recognized her instantly. "Isabella," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the bustle of the inauguration. She turned slowly, a small smile on her lips. "Hello, Alexander, it's been a long time." Rachel, who had been showing the facilities to some donors, noticed the scene and discreetly approached Lily, who was playing nearby. "I think we need to check the rooftop garden," Rachel suggested, gently guiding the girl towards the stairs. "Will you help me see if the plants are well watered?" In the lobby, Alexander and Isabella looked at each other in silence, years of unspoken words floating between them. "I saw the news," Isabella finally said, "about the girl who helped you find the truth, about how you transformed a lie into something beautiful. Is that why you're here?" he asked, his voice controlled but trembling. "I'm here because our daughter asked me to," Isabella replied. "She also saw the news, and she told me it was time for all truths to come to light." Alexander leaned against the wall, overwhelmed by the revelation. "Is she—" "She's fine, happy. She's 17 and wants to be a doctor." Isabella paused, looking again at the mural. "When I saw Lily in the news with those eyes so similar to mine, I understood why you chose her." "It wasn't conscious," Alexander admitted. "At least, not at first. But I think a part of me always knew that you were seeking redemption," Isabella completed. "I know, I sought it for years too, that's why I left. I was afraid that the world you had built, so full of appearances and expectations, would destroy us both." On the rooftop, Lily and Rachel watered the plants while observing the city. "Who's the lady talking to Mr. Alexander?" the girl asked. Rachel smiled softly. "Someone who, like you, taught him an important lesson about truth. Only it took him many years to understand it." Back in the lobby, Isabella took something out of her bag, a photograph. In it, a smiling young woman in a white coat posed in front of a medical school. "Her name is Laura," Isabella said, "and she wants to meet you when she's ready. But first, she wanted you to see what she's become, someone who also believes in helping others." Alexander took the photograph with trembling hands. "She has your smile," he murmured. "And your determination," Isabella added. "When she found out about the medical center, she said maybe it wasn't a coincidence that you chose a girl who looked so much like me. That perhaps the universe has mysterious ways of closing circles." At that moment, Lily came running down the stairs, followed by Rachel. She stopped upon seeing the scene, intuiting with that childlike wisdom that something important was happening. Isabella looked at her tenderly. "So you're the famous Lily, the girl who taught the adults to tell the truth." "I just reminded them of something they already knew," Lily replied with simplicity. "Like when you water a flower that's drying up. The water was always there. You just had to bring it to the plant." The sunset painted the New York City sky with golden hues when the last guests began to leave the Lilly Medical Center. In the garden, under the jacaranda, a small group remained gathered. Alexander, Isabella, Rachel, Sarah, Lily, and Michael. "It's funny," Lily reflected, playing with some fallen purple petals. "We all came here for different reasons, but now it seems like we were always meant to find each other." Isabella smiled, recognizing in the girl the same intuition that characterized her own daughter. "You know, my daughter Laura said something similar when she saw your story in the news. She said that some truths need time to bloom." "Like the jacaranda," Lily nodded. "Miss Rachel explained to me that it takes years for it to give its first flowers." Rachel, who had been observing the interaction in silence, approached Isabella. "All these years you were the ghost that inhabited Alexander's silences, the unspoken truth that consumed him. And you were the one who was there during his darkest years," Isabella replied, "who saw both the best and the worst in him." Sarah, who had been listening attentively, hugged her daughter. Sometimes angels come in unexpected forms. My Lily not only saved my life with her bravery, but she also saved souls she didn't even know needed saving. Michael approached discreetly with a tray of coffee and hot chocolate for everyone. As he served the drinks, he shared something unusual for him, a personal reflection. In all my years working for Mr. Montgomery, I had never seen him so at peace as he is now. And it all started with a small lie that transformed into the greatest truth. Alexander looked at Laura's photograph one more time before returning it to Isabella. Does she really want to meet me? She wants to meet the man you've become, Isabella replied. Not the businessman you were, but the man who was capable of admitting his mistakes and transforming them into something good. Lily, who had been listening, approached Alexander. Does that mean you have a real daughter? Like the princess in my play? The adults couldn't help but smile at the innocence of the question. Alexander knelt in front of her. I have 2 stories of redemption, he replied softly. One with Laura, which is just beginning after many years of silence, and another with you, who taught me that sometimes we need to lose everything we think is important to find what really matters. Rachel took out her phone and showed some photos of the garden on the corporate terrace, now in full bloom. Look, Isabella, this is also part of your daughter's legacy, though she doesn't know it. Lily taught us to plant beauty where there was only coldness. As Mom says, Lily interjected, flowers don't know about social classes or fortunes. They just need love and care to grow. Isabella looked around the medical center's garden, where the flowers planted by Lily were beginning to close their petals with the arrival of nightfall. Laura will be happy to know that her father finally understood that lesson. Will she come to see us? Lily asked hopefully. When she's ready, Isabella replied. And when she comes, maybe you could show her your garden on the terrace. She loves flowers too. A week after the inauguration of the medical center, Alexander was in his office reviewing the first reports of the families treated when Michael entered with an unusual expression on his face. Sir, he announced, you have a visitor. It's Laura. Alexander stood up so quickly he almost knocked over his chair. In the doorway of his office, a tall young woman with Isabella's eyes and his own shy smile was watching him. Hello, Laura said softly. Mum said you'd be here. For a moment, father and daughter looked at each other in silence, 17 years of absence weighing between them. It was Laura who finally broke the silence. I saw the garden on the terrace when I arrived. The girl Lily, did she design it? Alexander nodded, grateful for the safe topic. Would you like to see it up close? As they went up to the terrace, they ran into Rachel, who was watering the plants with Lily. The girl, who came regularly after school to tend to her garden, stopped short upon seeing the newcomer. Are you Laura? She asked, with her big eyes full of curiosity. Mr. Alexander's real daughter? Laura smiled at the direct question. And you must be the little truth warrior. My mother told me all about you. Lily approached Laura and without warning took her hand. Come, I want to show you something. She led her to the jacaranda, which was already beginning to show its first buds. Do you know why I planted this tree here? Because its roots have to grow very deep for its flowers to reach so high. Like the truth. Laura looked at her father, who was watching the scene with bright eyes. It seems you found a very wise teacher. Rachel, who had been maintaining a discreet distance, approached. Laura, your father has changed a lot thanks to Lily. We all have. I know, Laura replied. That's why I'm here. When I saw the news about the medical center, about how a lie transformed into something that helped so many people, I understood that maybe it was time to give new truths a chance. Lily, who was still holding Laura's hand, asked, Are you going to be a doctor? Yes, Laura smiled. I want to help people like your mum. Then you should come work at the medical center when you graduate, Lily suggested with the simplicity of children. That way we could have 2 happy stories, yours with your dad and that of all the people you're going to help. Alexander, who had been holding back tears, finally spoke. Laura, I know I can't get back the lost years, but maybe we can start over, she completed, without lies this time. Just truths, even if they hurt at first. Rachel observed how father and daughter began to walk through the garden, Lily still between them, showing Laura each plant and flower with enthusiasm. Michael approached with refreshments for everyone. Hey, it's amazing, he murmured to Rachel, how a small truth can trigger so many changes. It wasn't just the truth, Rachel replied, looking at Lily, who was now explaining to Laura the meaning of each flower in the garden. It was the pure heart that revealed it. A month later, the garden on the corporate terrace witnessed a special gathering. Around a table set under the jacaranda, now with its first purple buds, all the people whose lives had been intertwined by a small lie that blossomed into great truths gathered. Isabella and Laura had come from Boston. Sarah, fully recovered thanks to the treatment, radiated health. Rachel presided over the table with a serenity that contrasted with her former bitterness. Michael, for the first time, sat with everyone as an equal, and Lily, as always, was the heart beating at the center of it all. "I have an announcement to make," Laura began, taking her father's hand. "I've decided to do my medical residency at the Lilly Medical Center." Lily's eyes lit up. "Really? You're going to work with us?" "Yes," Laura smiled. "And I want to specialize in the type of treatment that helped your mom. I want to continue the legacy you started without knowing it." Sarah, who now worked as a coordinator of the center's social aid program, added, "And there's more news. The medical center model has been so successful that 3 more cities have requested to replicate it. Like the jacaranda flowers," Lily observed. "When the wind blows, the seeds fly and new trees are born in other places." Rachel took some documents out of her portfolio. "That's why we wanted to gather you all today. We've created a foundation. It will be called Seeds of Truth, and its mission will be to bring medical care and hope to communities in need throughout New York. And we want all of you to be part of it," Alexander added. "Not as beneficiaries or employees, but as family, because that's what we've become." Isabella, who had been observing her ex-partner's transformation with amazement, smiled. "It's incredible how fate works. Years ago I left because I feared this world of power and appearances would destroy us. And now that same world has transformed into something beautiful. Thanks to a little truth warrior," Michael added, winking at Lily. "It wasn't me," Lily protested. "It was all of you. I just said what I saw." "Sometimes," Rachel reflected, "that's all we need. Someone who sees the truth in our hearts and has the courage to say it out loud." Alexander stood up and walked to the edge of the terrace, observing the city stretching beneath them. "You know, for years I believed that success was measured in numbers in a bank account. But now I understand that true wealth is here in this garden, in this family we've created." Laura approached her father and hugged him, a gesture that just a few weeks ago would have been unthinkable. And to think it all started with a small lie. "That transformed into the greatest truth," Lily completed, joining the hug. One by one, they all joined in that collective embrace, while the afternoon sun bathed the terrace in golden light, and the wind scattered some purple petals from the jacaranda, like silent blessings over this unconventional family. A year had passed since that first lie that triggered so many truths. The Lilly Medical Center had become a model of community care, and 3 more centers were under construction in different parts of the city. It was the day of Lily's elementary school graduation, and the auditorium of her school in the Bronx was full. In the front row, a peculiar group caught attention. Alexander, Rachel, Laura, Isabella, Sarah, and Michael, all dressed elegantly but without the ostentation of before. "And now," the principal announced, "our student Lily will share a few words as the representative of her class." Lily went up to the podium, her school uniform impeccable and a radiant smile on her face. She was no longer the shy girl who had pretended to be a lost daughter. She had become a small leader who inspired others with her authenticity. "A year ago," she began, "I learned something very important. I learned that truth is like a seed. Sometimes it seems small and insignificant, but if you plant it in the right place and care for it with love, it can grow into something beautiful." In the audience, Alexander squeezed Laura's hand, while Rachel discreetly wiped away a tear. "In my school," Lily continued, "they teach us math, English, and science, but the most important lesson I learned was outside the classroom. I learned that when you tell the truth, even if it hurts or scares at first, it always brings good things in the end." Sarah, seated next to Isabella, smiled with pride. Her daughter had become a light that illuminated not only their lives, but those of an entire community. "Now, when I go to the medical center that bears my name," Lily went on, "I see people who are finding hope. I see Dr. Laura helping others as they once helped my mom. I see Mr. Alexander and Mrs. Rachel using their power to do good, and I understand that sometimes we need to lose our way to find the right path." Michael, who had documented every step of this transformation, smiled to see how that small lie had become a movement for positive change. My teacher says that when we finish elementary school, it's like planting a new seed for our future. I already know what kind of seed I want to plant. I want to keep telling the truth, keep helping others, and keep reminding everyone that love and honesty are the strongest roots we can have. The audience burst into applause, but Lily wasn't finished. And I want to thank my family. Not just my mum, who always taught me to be honest, but also my heart family. Mr. Alexander, who learned that the greatest power is in admitting our mistakes. Mrs. Rachel, who showed me that it's never too late to change. Dr. Laura, who came to heal not just bodies but also hearts. Mrs. Isabella, who taught us that some truths need time to bloom. And Michael, who was always there, silent but strong like the roots of a tree. She paused for a moment, looking at each of them. Because in the end, the greatest truth I learned is that family isn't just the one that gives you life, but the one that helps you live it with truth and love. As the sun set, painting the New York City sky with golden and purple hues, the family gathered one last time on the corporate terrace, now transformed into a true urban oasis. The jacaranda, taller and stronger, spread its purple flowers over all of them like a silent blessing. Lily, still in her graduation uniform, walked among the flowers she had planted a year ago, all of them now in full bloom. Each plant told a story. Each flower represented a truth discovered. "You know," the girl said, gently touching a rose petal, "when all this began, I thought we were acting in a play. But in the end, I think we were learning to be who we really are." Alexander, who no longer wore his formal suits with the same rigidity as before, sat on one of the garden benches next to Laura. "Sometimes we need to lose our way to find the right path," he reflected, repeating the words Lily had said in her speech. Rachel, who now directed the Seeds of Truth Foundation, smiled as she served lemonade for everyone. "And sometimes we need a child to show us the way back to our own humanity." Isabella, who had decided to stay in the city to be close to Laura and this extended family, took out her camera to capture the moment. "They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but some truths can only be felt with the heart." Sarah, fully recovered and radiant with health, hugged her daughter. "My little truth warrior, who would have thought that your courage would change so many lives?" "Thousands of lives," Michael corrected, consulting his tablet. "The medical program has already helped more than 5,000 families, and the new centers will serve thousands more." Laura, who now directed the treatment program at the Lilly Medical Center, added, "And each healing story is also a story of truth and hope." Lily approached the edge of the terrace, observing the city stretching beneath them. At the medical center, in the new clinics, it's like truth is really growing throughout the city. "As you once said," Alexander remembered, joining her at the railing, "truth is like the sun, it always finds its way." "And like the jacaranda flowers," Rachel added, "it spreads, bringing beauty to unexpected places." The family shared a simple dinner on the terrace, under the stars that were beginning to appear in the night sky. "Look," she pointed. "From here you can see the other gardens we've planted." It wasn't a business dinner or a charity gala. It was simply a family celebrating the transformative power of truth and love. "What's next now?" Laura asked, as everyone enjoyed dessert. "We keep planting truth," Lily replied with simplicity, "and taking care of the ones that have already bloomed." Alexander looked around at this unconventional family that fate had brought together. At his daughter Laura, who had found her way back into his life. At Rachel, who had transformed her bitterness into purpose. At Isabella, who had had the courage to give a second chance. At Sarah, whose strength had inspired everyone. At Michael, whose silent loyalty had been an anchor in times of change. And finally at Lily, the little warrior who had transformed a lie into the most beautiful truth of all. "You know," Alexander said to Lily, "that night at the gala, when everything seemed lost, you told me something I'll never forget. You said I was just a little lost." "And it was true," she smiled. "Everyone was a little lost. They just needed to find their way back to their hearts." As night fell over the city, a soft breeze moved the garden flowers, scattering petals and promises of more truths to bloom. Because some stories don't really end. They just keep growing like a well-tended garden, reminding us that the smallest truth can transform the world, one heart at a time.